Welcome to The Deep Dive, the place where we synthesize a complex stack of ancient texts, historical research, and theological insights, really trying to turn that information overload into crystal clear understanding.
We really do. We are your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed.
And today we are diving deep into a really transformative chapter of Jesus' ministry.
That's right. We're focusing on a pivotal, harmonized stretch of time covering key interactions you'll find in Matthew 15 through 16 and Mark 7 through 8.
So what's our mission today?
Well, our mission is to analyze this phase. It's a period defined by two massive themes. One, the radical expansion of Christ's mercy toward the Gentile world.
And the second?
The equally radical intensification of conflict with the entrenched Jewish religious authorities. You can feel the tension ratcheting up.
And to do this justice, we're not just, reading it chronologically. We are viewing every single interaction through the combined lenses of all four gospel writers.
Exactly. We need Matthew, who presents Jesus as the Messianic King, the fulfillment of the covenant.
And then there's Mark, who always shows us the powerful, active, suffering servant.
And we'll be layering in Luke's perspective, too. He highlights Jesus as the perfect man, focusing on that universal compassion, that human empathy.
And of course, John.
Yeah.
John, who constantly reaffirms Jesus as God incarnate, the divine authority and creative power behind every single miracle and every teaching.
Right.
So the pith of this particular deep dive is really recognizing this dramatic pivot. This is the moment where Christ structurally demonstrates that his kingdom is defined purely by faith.
Tenacious faith at that.
Yes, tenacious individual faith.
Yeah.
Not by any measure of ethnic or religious pedigree.
And at the same time, he's confronting the profound danger of institutional hardened unbelief. It's like we're watching the doors of the kingdom swing wide open for some, while for others they are slamming shut.
Okay, so let's unpack this opening narrative, which I find, it's almost scandalous in its tension.
It really is. Jesus
has just left this blazing argument with the Pharisees in Galilee over purity specifically, their fixation on ritual hand-washing, tradition, over genuine heart cleanliness. So he withdraws. But where he retreats to is entirely strategic and fraught with tension. He goes into Gentile Phoenician territory.
The area of Tyre and Sidon.
Exactly.
And the geography here is just loaded. Tyre and Sidon weren't just non-Jewish territory. They were historically pagan commercial centers. They were often hostile to Israel.
Right. This is the region where Jezebel came from. So there's this deep, ancient cultural opposition baked into the location itself.
Absolutely. So when Matthew, writing to his Jewish audience, records that the Messianic King deliberately steps outside the traditional covenant borders of Israel, well, that's a huge declaration.
It's a statement.
It's a massive statement. It foreshadows the Great Commission, that global mandate to come.
So that's the king asserting his domain is global, not just national. But Mark, writing the servant gospel, he gives us this beautiful counterpoint to that authority.
What's that?
Mark notes that Jesus entered a house. He sought privacy and wanted no one to know.
I love that detail. It speaks so powerfully to Luke's theme of the ultimate man. Jesus, even though he's divine, possessed a perfect humanity. He needed rest. He needed to retreat after spiritual conflict.
He needed privacy. But Mark immediately follows up with that crucial observation.
The servant could not be hid.
Yes. His reputation, the sheer magnetic pull of his power and compassion, had already crossed every single clean and unclean border they could imagine.
And that's John's lens, right? His identity as God incarnate made concealment impossible. The servant's mission is just relentless, and his accessibility knows no limits.
And this is why the woman finds him. So let's talk about her identity, because both Matthew and Mark use these really specific labels to maximize the cultural tension.
They really do. Matthew, always emphasizing the covenant framework, he calls her a Canaanite.
And that word is like a historical alarm bell for any Jewish reader.
Oh, absolutely. These were the ancient, historical, theological enemies of Israel, the people they were commanded to drive out of the land. It just instantly heightens the stakes of the encounter.
And Mark, how does he frame it for his Roman audience?
Mark uses two phrases. Greek, a Syrophoenician by race. It just stresses her complete Gentile pagan status. She is the ultimate outsider.
She has absolutely no claim on the promises of Israel. None.
Zero. And yet she approaches Jesus and addresses him with this breathtaking theological precision. She says, "Lord, Son of David."
That is exclusively messianic, royal, kingly language. It's the title the Jewish nation should have been using to plead for deliverance.
And that's the profound irony, isn't it? The spiritual insight needed to correctly identify the Messiah is completely present in this Gentile outsider, but it's utterly absent in the learned religious elite Jesus just left.
Her access is born not of lineage,
Yeah.
but of deep desperation married to faith.
And that desperation is fueled by the cruelest kind of human suffering. Her daughter is miserably demonized or grievously vexed with a devil.
This just highlights the reality of the spiritual warfare that's happening behind the scenes. Demonic oppression is often aimed at the most vulnerable, and it's intended to break the human spirit.
Especially the spirit of the intercessor, in this case, the mother.
You see her fierce, protective, maternal instinct just channeled into this powerful intercessory prayer. She recognized Christ's authority, and she fought the spiritual battle using the weapon of faith.
So how does the king respond to this desperate, correct address?
Silence.
Yep.
Matthew records he did not answer her a word. I think this silence is one of the most challenging parts of the story for a modern reader.
It's very difficult. We expect immediate compassionate action from the servant. Was this rejection? Is he ignoring her?
It feels like it.
But it's absolutely not. The silence serves a dual strategic purpose, and we really need all four lenses to see it clearly. First, it was a test of her faith. It was designed to bring it to maturity, to bring it to intensity.
And second,
it was a test designed to expose the latent prejudice and the spiritual blindness of his own disciples.
and the disciples fail that test spectacularly.
They really do.
They urge Jesus to send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. They saw her not as a soul in need, but as an annoyance.
Just a nuisance.
A nuisance disturbing their newfound tranquility or their sense of purity. This just reflects the prevalent exclusionary attitude of the time. Gentiles are a bother to be dismissed.
And this forces the king to articulate the divine covenant priority. He says, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
This is such a crucial theological anchor.
It is. It affirms the divine chronological order of salvation history, Jew first, then Gentile, without ever implying absolute exclusion. Paul later confirms this, doesn't he?
He does in Romans 15. He says, Christ became a servant to the circumcised first for the sake of God's truth, to confirm the promises given to the patriarchs.
So it's about order, not exclusion.
Right. But the woman doesn't take the hint. She doesn't accept the dismissal. She gets closer, she bows, and she abandons the royal title for pure, simple humility.
Lord, help me.
Just that. And this brings us to the moment of profound theological tension, the real test of her humility, the comparison to the dogs.
Jesus states the covenant reality bluntly. It is not good to be taking the children's bread and throwing it to the dogs. The children's bread is the Messianic blessing designated for Israel first.
Now, the tension here lies entirely in the word choice. We often miss the nuance in translation.
That's so true. If Jesus had used the common Jewish slur for Gentiles kuon, which means a wild, scavenging street dog, that would be absolute rejection. It would have been a harsh final dismissal.
But he uses a different word, doesn't he?
He uses kunarian, which is the diminutive form. It means little dogs or household pets.
So that's key.
It's the whole key. He is softening the metaphor. He's referring to subordinate but still protected and cared for members of the household, not unclean street refuse. It's a test. Would she accept a place beneath the table, recognizing Israel's covenant priority, while still maintaining hope in the master's character?
And her reply is truly a masterful piece of theological genius under pressure.
It's brilliant.
She accepts the label, she pivots the insult, and she turns this metaphor of scarcity into an argument for overwhelming abundance. She says, Yes, Lord, for even the dogs feed on the children's scraps falling from under the table of their lords.
She completely understands the nature of the kingdom. She's arguing that the master's table, Christ's grace and power, is so incredibly abundant that the overflow, the crumbs, is more than sufficient for her daughter's entire deliverance.
She didn't need a seat at the table. She didn't need to be grafted into the family structure right then. She just needed a single shred of the king's authority. This shows a profound level of, cognitive flexibility and resilience under testing.
It's the perfect definition of tenacious, persistent prayer. She uses Jesus' own words to win her case.
And the king is moved. He issues one of the highest commendations recorded in the Gospels. O woman, your faith is great. Because of this saying, go away. Let it be done to you as you wish.
And you can see Matthew's kingly authority lens right there. It's a royal decree, publicly honoring a Gentile's faith as great.
And the John lens highlights the divine power. The healing is immediate and remote from that very hour.
His word alone, across space and time, instantly dispatches the demonic force. There is no physical touch needed, only the command of God incarnate.
So this event is a massive prophetic fulfillment.
Huge. It's an initial, tangible fulfillment of Genesis 12.3, that through Abraham's seed, all the families of the earth would be blessed.
It also foreshadows the inclusion of Rahab the Canaanite into the lineage of Christ, which Matthew himself points out in his genealogy.
And it validates Isaiah 49.6, which establishes the Messiah as a light to the Gentiles. This is that promise in action.
For the modern believer, the application here is just so direct.
It really is. First, persistent intercession. When God seems silent, the answer isn't to abandon the request, but to press closer.
Right. And second, it calls us to reject the spirit of religious entitlement or exclusivity. If Christ's mercy crossed the bitterest cultural divide at that time, our modern church has no business building barriers, cultural, racial, or social today.
Absolutely. We are called to intercede persistently for family members under spiritual attack, knowing that the smallest crumb of Christ's authority is enough for the greatest need.
Okay, so following this incredible encounter, Jesus doesn't retreat back into Galilee's Jewish centers. He makes a deliberate, circuitous journey, passing through Sidon and descending into the region of the Decapolis.
The predominantly Gentile area of the 10 cities, he is cementing this new theme of Gentile inclusion. It's not a one-off.
It's a highly strategic move. He is affirming that the boundaries have shifted, and Matthew's account of the subsequent mass healing campaign shows that kingly posture again.
How so?
He says Jesus went up into the mountain, he sat there. This echoes Moses on Sinai and the Sermon on the Mount, the king ruling and teaching. But now the subjects are Gentile, as these vast crowds gather, laying the lame, the blind, the maimed, and the mute at his feet.
So this mass healing campaign demonstrates the immediate, visible restoration promised by the Messianic Kingdom.
Exactly. It's fulfilling the prophetic mandate. But then Mark, the servant gospel, he steps away from that wide crowd view to give us the granular, intimate detail of one single healing.
The deaf-mute man.
Right.
And Mark emphasizes the physical, compassionate engagement of the servant. It says Jesus takes the man from the crowd by himself.
Which is such a profound act of sensitivity. That's Luke's ultimate man theme at work.
Yeah.
He respects the dignity of the man, maybe saving him the embarrassment of his disability being cured as a public spectacle.
Yeah.
He honors the individual.
He does. And Mark meticulously records the tactile method used, which feels almost, ritualistic, but it's entirely unique to this instance. He put his fingers into the man's ears and he touched his tongue. The servant is literally getting his hands dirty.
So what's the theological analysis here? Why this physical involvement?
Well, in the context of the region, the act of spitting was sometimes associated with ancient folk medicine. It was believed to have curative properties. By incorporating these elements, Jesus demonstrates his power and authority over all earthly means, even cultural expectations.
And at the same time, he's challenging the rigid Jewish purity laws.
Exactly. By touching this man, who is likely excluded from society due to his defects, Jesus shows that the servant's definition of purity comes from inside, not from external ritual.
And the variety in his healing methods is a critical teaching moment, isn't it? He heals by touch, by word, by remote command.
Precisely. Jesus intentionally prevents any formula from solidifying. He doesn't want people developing a faith in the procedure, the fingers, the spit, the command. He wants their faith centered wholly on him.
The touch is an incarnational transfer of life and authority. It was necessary to meet this man in his isolated state.
Then we have that profoundly human moment. Jesus looks up to heaven and groans. Mark uses the Greek word stinazo.
And this is more than just a sigh of weariness, right?
Oh, it's a deep, visceral groan. It reflects Luke's ultimate man, the perfect human empathy experiencing the crushing weight of the fall. He is not groaning because the healing is difficult for him.
So what's he groaning about?
He is groaning out of sorrow and profound grief at the state of human brokenness, the isolation, the disability that this man is experiencing. He feels the suffering before he commands the restoration.
And then comes the divine fiat, preserved in its original language. He commands in Aramaic, meaning be opened.
The preservation of that specific Aramaic word by Mark suggests an immediate, localized, first-hand witness captured this moment. And in John's thematic lens, this word functions as a creative fiat. It's the authoritative word of God, instantly rearranging molecular structure.
And the restoration is total. His ears were open, the restraint of his tongue was loosed, and he could speak correctly. But what's so fascinating here is the depth of the miracle. This isn't just fixing a broken eardrum.
Not at all. The profound nature of it is neurological and linguistic. A person who is born deaf or has been deaf since early childhood can't speak correctly because they've never established the necessary auditory memory or linguistic pathways.
So for him to instantly have clear, intelligible speech,
It means Jesus did not just fix the tongue and ears. He instantly provided the memory, the language capacity, and the neurological pathways required for perfect communication. It is a miracle of total recreation.
and these healings are just directly fulfilling Messianic prophecy.
Specifically Isaiah 35, verses 5 and 6, which promises, "Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as an hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing."
So Jesus is authenticating his credentials to a Gentile audience, demonstrating that the God of Israel is now fulfilling his promises among the nations.
And the Gentile crowd's reaction is critical. They were utterly astonished, saying, "He has done all things well."
That phrase deliberately echoes Genesis 1, where God reviews creation and finds it very good.
Yes. Jesus is acting as the creator, restoring what the fall had broken. Matthew records that they glorified the God of Israel, recognizing that this power came from the Jewish Messiah, thereby validating the universality of Israel's God.
And yet, despite this outpouring of praise, Jesus cautioned them to tell no one. Why do that?
It's the servant's posture. He's managing the timing of the kingdom. If he allowed this popular political messianic fervor to swell in Gentile territory, it would derail his ultimate mission to Jerusalem and the cross.
He was bringing the signs, but he was not yet presenting himself as the political revolutionary king.
Exactly. Yet the more he commanded silence, the more that natural human tendency took over. The proclamation was unstoppable.
Which itself is a spiritual theme, right? You cannot hide the light.
You can't.
So the narrative flows immediately from this incredible healing campaign to the second major miracle of provision. And it's crucial for our listeners to distinguish this from the feeding of the 5,000.
Yes, that's a very important distinction. That miracle was primarily Jewish. This one, the feeding of the 4,000, occurs in this Gentile-majority Decapolis region.
The difference reinforces the scope of the kingdom.
It does, and Mark's servant focus emphasizes the profound compassion, the splanchnizomai of Jesus. This is a gut-level emotional concern. He says, "I feel compassion on the crowd because they have remained with me already 3 days and have nothing to eat. They will faint on the way."
The servant sees and addresses the practical, physical suffering of the people first.
And Matthew's kingly perspective shows the benevolent provider extending provision to all subjects, Jew and Gentile, of this new, expanded kingdom community. He is the shepherd who ensures none of his sheep are left wanting.
What's so fascinating to me is the disciples' response. Despite having just witnessed the 5,000 feeding, they show this shocking case of recurrent spiritual blindness.
It's almost unbelievable. They ask, where would anyone be able to find enough bread so as to satisfy such a great crowd here in a wilderness?
I find this so humbling and frankly so relatable. They saw God provide for 5,000 people using only 5 loaves and 2 fish.
And now they're facing a smaller crowd, 4,000, and they have slightly more resources, 7 loaves.
And they instantly default to the scarcity mindset. They focused on the visible source. Where can we buy it? What do we possess? Rather than the true source of all supply, which is the Lord standing right there with them.
It's the failure of faith memory, a phenomenon we all experience. We take God's past consistent blessings for granted, whether it's provision, health, or protection, and we immediately fall into worry over the present scarcity.
The disciples' question reflects a deeper spiritual malaise. It's about how quickly we forget the evidence that's right in front of us.
It's true. So Jesus brings them back to reality by inventorying their scant resources. 7 loaves and a few small fish.
And that number 7 is highly symbolic in Scripture. It often represents completeness or universality, which ties perfectly to the Gentile context of this miracle.
He then models gratitude toward the Father as the ultimate source, giving thanks and breaking the bread. The king relies fully on the Almighty God. The abundance is striking. 4,000 men, plus women and children, ate and were satisfied, completely full.
And then we have that specific detail about the leftovers.
Yes. They collected 7 large baskets full. This is where the typology becomes unforgettable. The baskets used here are the spirus.
And a spirus was what exactly?
The spirus was a large woven Gentile-sized hamper. They were often large enough to hold a man, like the one Paul was lowered in from the wall of Damascus in Acts 9.
And this contrasts starkly with the kophinos baskets used in the feeding of the 5,000.
Exactly. Those were smaller, traditional Jewish travel baskets used for carrying personal, clean rations.
So the seven full Gentile hampers left over symbolize the fullness or completeness of God's grace and sufficiency for the Gentile nations.
It demonstrates clearly that Christ is the bread of life, as John 6 says, for the entire world, not just the Jewish nation.
This miracle echoes the manna in the wilderness, from Exodus 16, God providing daily bread for his people.
And it anticipates the Messianic banquet of universal feasting foretold in Isaiah 25. The message is just crystal clear. The provision of the Messianic kingdom is not only available to the Gentiles, but it is super abundant. It reaches into their own cultural containers and fills them completely.
This entire phase of ministry is just a series of escalating contrasts. Jesus moves from Gentile territory, where he found this incredible faith and performed compassionate miracles.
And he goes back to Jewish territory, Maganon or Dalmanutha, on the western shore of Galilee.
And the immediate response is confrontation, not celebration.
The opposition is swift and coordinated. Matthew notes that the Pharisees, the rigid religious legalists, and the Sadducees, the secularists who denied resurrection and the spiritual realm, they unite.
Which is a political shockwave. These groups were bitter theological rivals.
But they view Jesus as a common existential threat to their established religious authority, and it causes them to become bedfellows.
They come testing him, asking for a sign from heaven. They just ignore the mass healings, the two massive feedings, the prophecies he just fulfilled in the Decapolis.
They demand a spectacular, undeniable proof on their terms, something cinematic, celestial, to control him or justify their rejection of him.
And Mark captures Jesus' profound, visceral reaction to this spiritual arrogance.
He responded by sighing deeply in his spirit. This is the same deep groan stenazo we saw when he confronted the physical brokenness of the deaf-mute man.
But here the groan is grief and profound frustration at their willful, chosen spiritual blindness and their hardened intellectual pride.
It's disappointment at self-imposed spiritual death. And Matthew, emphasizing the king's authority, delivers this sharp rebuke. He judges them as hypocrites.
He contrasts their keen ability to discern weather signs.
The sky is red and gloomy, predicting a storm.
With their complete inability to discern the signs of the times.
They had all the necessary data, Moses, the prophets, John the Baptist, the current miracles fulfilling Isaiah, but they refused the truth because it required them to surrender their power structure.
And Jesus diagnoses their spiritual state, calling them an evil and adulterous generation. That's heavy Old Testament language.
It is. It's used by prophets like Hosea and Jeremiah, and it signifies covenant unfaithfulness and spiritual rebellion against God. It often equates religious elitism with idolatry.
The king refuses their demand entirely. He asserts his supreme authority by confirming that no sign will be given to this generation.
This class of people who demand proof while actively rejecting truth.
Except the sign of the prophet Jonah.
This is the definitive answer. It's the ultimate typology, and it's the final word. Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights. This refers directly and exclusively to Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection.
The supreme, decisive proof of his kingship and deity.
And the implication is massive. If they reject the resurrection, which is the foundational truth of everything, there is literally nothing left in the universe that could convince them.
And there's another layer too, isn't there, with Jonah's mission?
Yes, Jonah was the prophet sent by God to the Gentiles in Nineveh. So by giving the sign of Jonah, Jesus is implying that because Israel's leadership has rejected the signs, the gospel will now decisively pivot, ensuring the message reaches the Gentiles.
Just as the king's ministry has shown throughout this entire section.
Exactly. And Jesus' action after the rebuke is final. He refuses to perform for skeptics, he leaves them, and he departs.
This provides such a powerful modern warning against what we could call Pharisaic sign-seeking.
What do you mean by that?
Demanding external spectacle or philosophical complexity or scientific proof before committing to faith, while internally rejecting the core truth of the resurrection and the need for repentance.
It's true. Religious familiarity, as exemplified by these leaders, often creates the deepest, hardest forms of unbelief. The spiritual battle here is about control and intellectual submission.
So we've covered 4 distinct but interconnected narratives. Zooming out, the power of this phase of ministry is seeing how it all integrates chronologically, prophetically, and thematically into one comprehensive demonstration of Christ's identity and mission.
The first synthesis point has to be prophetic fulfillment and typology. Jesus' actions are the absolute fulfillment of the ancient covenant. The Syrophoenician woman's faith and the Decapolis healings, directly fulfill Isaiah 35 and Isaiah 49.
And even Rahab the Canaanite being grafted into the lineage, which Matthew points out, is enacted here in spirit.
Right, and the feedings echo the great provision of the Exodus manna and Elisha's multiplication, establishing Jesus as the greater provider who feeds the Messianic banquet foretold in Isaiah 25.
And the sign of Jonah confirms the resurrection as the singular foundational proof, which Paul elevates as the core truth in 1 Corinthians 15.
Then we have to examine the spiritual warfare and allegory layer. By entering Tyre, Sidon, and the Decapolis, Christ is making a clear, aggressive invasion into what the Apostle Paul would later call enemy territory.
Lands deep in pagan worship and under direct demonic bondage.
So the deliverance of the woman's daughter is Christ invading and reclaiming territory, and the allegories are so profound.
The bread representing Christ's sustaining grace.
The crumbs representing Gentile access to salvation, that overflowing abundance of his mercy. Deafness and mutism allegorize the spiritual inability to hear or confess Christ's truth, a spiritual bondage that only his creative, divine word can break.
And that battle over the source confirms that Jesus uses his power for compassionate service, but he refuses to use it for vanity or showmanship like the Pharisees demanded.
And if we move to the emotional, psychological, and social analysis, this section confirms the full emotional spectrum of Christ Luke's ultimate man.
He exhibits that profound visceral compassion, the splensizomai and stenazo, for human suffering, the hungry crowd, the deaf-mute man.
Yet he shows righteous, weary frustration, sighing in his spirit, at the chosen, willful spiritual blindness of the Pharisees. He grieves over the effects of sin, but he's angered by the refusal of truth.
Psychologically, the contrast between the Canaanite woman and the disciples is just stark. The woman models profound maternal instinct and that cognitive flexibility. She takes what could be seen as a devastating rejection and treats it as an invitation.
She pivots the perceived insult into a prayer point, demonstrating resilience under the highest pressure.
Conversely, the disciples model a scarcity mindset. Even after 2 miracles of abundance, their immediate default setting is worry and resource limitation.
Where would we find bread?
Exactly. Their faith memory constantly fails, which demonstrates that familiarity with the divine does not guarantee spiritual insight. In fact, it often breeds a dangerous spiritual complacency.
And socially, this entire sequence is a revolution. Jesus intentionally tears down multiple barriers. He defies ethnic exclusivity, Jew versus Gentile. He honors the bold voice of a Gentile woman challenging gender norms.
And he radically challenges the religious elite's focus on ritual purity over genuine faith. He is establishing a kingdom community defined entirely by faith and mercy, not by pedigree.
This is the foundation for the middle wall of partition that Paul writes about being broken down in Ephesians 2. It's prophetically enacted right here in the Decapolis.
So we shift to the modern application and instruction. What specific lessons does this phase of ministry give us today as believers?
Well, first, instruction for prayer. The Canaanite woman teaches us to never give up, even when God seems silent or distant. We're encouraged to persist with tenacity and humility.
Recognizing that his grace is always sufficient. The crumbs are always enough, even for the most massive spiritual need, like a demonized family member.
Second, source acknowledgement. We have to fight the scarcity mindset that plagued the disciples. We need to consciously practice recognizing God as the true, consistent source of all provision, spiritual and physical.
To avoid the paralyzing fear and frustration that comes from focusing only on visible lack, whether that's in our personal finances, our health, or our national circumstances.
Third, inclusivity and missions. The church is called to embrace diversity and intentionally break down modern dividing walls, economic, political, cultural. We must remember that Christ's ministry intentionally sought out and honored the farthest outsiders first.
Demonstrating that the scope of salvation is universal.
And finally, the warning remains powerful. Beware of religious hypocrisy and spiritual blindness. The danger lies in knowing how to read the physical signs of the world, the markets, the science, the data, the cultural trends, but utterly failing to read the spiritual signs of the times.
The evidence of God's redemptive work has been given in Christ, and demanding further spectacle or external proof is just intellectual rebellion, echoing the Pharisees.
Exactly.
So these 4 snapshots, the Syrophoenician mother, the healing touch, the multiplication for the nations, and the refusal of spectacle, they integrate perfectly to reveal the multidimensional Christ.
We've seen the King, whose authoritative decree and provision extend without limit.
The servant, who meets deep needs with intimate, tireless compassion.
The ultimate man, who fully embraces the weight of human suffering and loneliness.
And the God, whose creative word alone delivers, multiplies, and restores.
We are instructed to intertwine our theological proclamation with genuinely compassionate service, following that king-servant model. And we're warned against letting religious tradition or fear or any sense of personal entitlement blind us to the foundational truth that God's mercy reaches the farthest margins.
And the encouragement is immense. Christ's authority is more than sufficient for every need and every barrier you face.
So think back to that crucial moment for the Canaanite woman. She needed only a crumb of Christ's blessing to solve the biggest problem she faced, her daughter's deliverance. She was begging for the overflow of grace.
Right.
Yet through Christ's resurrection, the ultimate sign, we have been invited not just to the crumbs, but to the full feast. So the question for you to take away is this. What crumb from the Lord's table, what small measure of his immense authority and grace do you need to recognize is already more than sufficient for the biggest need you are facing today? Go deeper with that thought.